Hello everyone and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. In this video we'll continue our conversation about Soviet college education. This is part 2, and if you by any chance missed part 1, link will be below in the comment section. And if you are interested in the topic of Soviet education, I have a separate playlist on that specific topic with over 30 videos in it right now. Link also will be below in the comment section. And before we begin, I would like to thank everyone who submitted a question about Soviet college education. Unfortunately, I won't answer most of them in this video because we're in the initial stage of just getting accepted into college, and most questions relates to later stage of studying, partying, doing wild things, and whatever else you guys been asking. So it will be probably video number 3 answering your question. But I had a question from one of the members of my channel, Andre Fisse from Canada, and he asked, blood will help to get accepted. And what he's asking is, knowing people, having the right connections, having friends in specific college, if there was a place that a lot of people tried to get in, definitely knowing people in that college will definitely help. And that's what we called blood back in the Soviet Union, having the right connections or knowing people. In the end of my first video about Soviet college, I showed you my high school diploma, which we called in Soviet Union attestat. And I talked how important it was to have the highest possible score. So it's your average score. And remember, we had grades 5 excellent, 4 good, and 3 satisfactory. So my average was 4.5. So that would be like B plus in American standard grading. So that was pretty strong, but not perfect. In Soviet schools, students like me that had only 4 and 5 grades, so good and excellent grades, were called хорошист. Хорошист. So it's a gooder, I guess you can say it. So хорошо means good. So we had this word хорошист that describes students had only 4 and 5 as their grades. Might as well let's teach you other words too, other terminology. So if a student in the Soviet school was getting mostly 3 grades, which is satisfactory, so barely making it, he was called троечник. Троечник, so it's like the thirder. Тройка, it's a 3. And that's the students that would end up going to trade schools or straight to the factories. Троечник. And then we had отличник. Отличник. Excellenter, I guess. So that's the student that only had 5 excellent grades, maybe sometimes 4s, but in his табель, so the piece of paper that had all the grades, you had all 5s, so you were отличник. Отличник. And if a student managed to finish Soviet high school, so 10th grade, with only excellent grades, all 5s, he will receive a gold medal and a little ID. And it was made of real gold, and that was the highest award you could get for being an excellent pupil, excellent student. And if you happen to have all 5s, all A's in American way, and just 1 4 or B, then you would receive a silver medal, which also was great. And that wasn't easy to get those medals. In my class, out of 30 kids, we had only one guy who managed to pull the silver medal. He still got 4 grade on chemistry, and I'm respecting that lady. She was kind of mean because, when school management sees there is a person who can get a gold medal, they kind of try to help him to achieve it. But that chemistry chick, she just dug her heels and refused to give a guy excellent grade because he wasn't just good enough. So my friend Andrei ended up getting only a silver medal. And I'm telling you about golden and silver medal because having those medals give you one amazing perk. When you go into the college, you don't have to do entry tests. No exams if you have gold or silver medal. You're just going to have so-called собеседование. So you're going to sit down with local professors and have a chit-chat. So they're going to just ask you questions, but there'll be no tests. So that was a great perk to get the medal in school so you can skip those tough entry tests. And when I was gathering information for this video, I reached out to Andrei and I called him on the phone. He also lives in the United States right now. And I asked him about his experience going to college. And I was surprised to discover that his silver medal didn't help him. He still ended up doing entry tests because he did what I called reaching for the stars. He went to Moscow and he attempted to become a student of МГИМО, Московский государственный институт международных отношений, Moscow State Institute of International Relationship. So that's the school that prepares future diplomats. MGIMO was no doubt one of the most prestigious colleges in the Soviet Union because you will get a job that allows you to travel all over the world, live in the foreign countries. So many people wanted to go there. So competition was so intense. So even silver medal would be enough. You still had to do the test because there were so many other people with gold and silver medals from all over the Soviet Union trying to get into MGIMO. And I just looked it up. In 1989, there were 6 people for every available spot in MGIMO. So this is pretty tough so-called concourse competition. So out of 1,000 spots, there were 6,000 people from all over the Soviet Union. Top of the cream, a lot of people with blood. They were trying to become students of MGIMO. For comparison, my competition at the Kyiv Polytechnical Institute back in 1988 was 2.5 people per one spot. So way better. What made getting into college even more complicated for kids like me, fresh high school graduates, are so-called quotes or reserved spots. So every college was required to set some spots aside for specific groups of people. For example, so many spots for workers. So if the person works at the factory, finished trade school, and he wants to continue education, he had a preferred spot, so he won't be competing with me. He will have a less competition because he already have reserved spots for people like him. There will be another group of, for example, kids that coming from other regions, from other republics or other autonomous republic of Russia. So all those quotes, they will kind of lock up those spots for a specific group of people. Or in the end of Soviet Union, there were some spots for so-called Afghanцы. So it's the soldiers that served in Afghanistan. So they had their own quotas. For example, my friend Andrei that I just mentioned, he failed to get in on his first try. And there's one other problem. If you don't get in right away, then at age of 18, you're going to be drafted to the army service. So he went to army, served for 2 years. After getting out of the army, he tried again, but this time he was in a special reserved spot. He was a quota part for the former military, and it helped him with his points to score enough and become a student of MGIMO. And speaking of army service, I already made a separate video discussing the topic that college was also a tool for the guys to avoid military service, because quite a few colleges, they had so-called военная кафедра, so like a military department, which you're gonna attend while you go into college, and you will become a lieutenant in reserve in the end of it. So you'll skip 2 years of army service if you go to specific college that had a military department, военная кафедра. And if you are interested, I will provide the link to that video once again in the comment section as well. Many Soviet-era colleges, especially in Belarus and Ukraine, had another really ugly quota. Is quota how many Jews they were allowed to become a students every year. But that was not like a government decision. That was up to local management. If they were anti-Semitic, they will provide a policy that you need to limit how many Jewish students you would accept. And if you're interested in the topic of Jewish quotas in Soviet colleges, I have one video about it called Mishas Story. It's a story about Mikhail, a Jewish guy who grew up in Moscow, and that's how he met his wife. She came from Ukraine to attend college in Moscow because she couldn't attend similar college in Ukraine due to the Jewish quotas. So I'll post the link below in the comment section as well. If you recall, I mentioned in my previous video that after kids finished 8 years in school, so that will be like American version of middle school, many kids left because they were not smart enough to continue education, and they went to trade schools or straight to work, and about 50% left, was what I remember. So we had 4 classes in the 8th grade, 30 kids each class, and then they had to combine 4 classes in 2, and that's how we went in what you call high school, 9th and 10th grade. So out of 120 kids, we had only 60 left. So my class had 30 and the B class had 30. And out of those students that finished high school with me, probably 90% continued education and went to some college. And once again, it was very beneficial to live in the capital of Ukraine because we had so many different colleges right in the city, so people didn't have to move. And except Andrei that went to Moscow to try for MGIMO, the rest of us, we stayed in Kiev and went to local colleges. One of my friends, Oleg, went to KISI, Kievsky Inженерно-строительный Institute, so it's a Kiev Engineer Construction Institute, so you can become a construction engineer or architect. Unfortunately, he never used his profession after he graduated, but that's the place that he attended. Another friend of mine, Valera, went to military college, so we had quite a few of those in Kiev as well, and he went. The college name is Kvirtu, so that's the Kiev Military Engineer Radio Technical College, so you will become an officer after graduating from that college. And I'm 100% positive that his parents used blood, used those special connections and knowing people to help their son to get into that military college, since his father was pretty high-ranking officer back in the day. And I knew that Valera's health wasn't that great. He always had migraines and he wasn't really strong. And going to military college, you actually had to pass the medical test. He magically managed to pass the test and became a student of that college. Later, I found out that the prettiest girls of Kiev were after cadets from that specific college. And the main reason is because when they graduate, they become officers of air defense. So they'll be posted in countries like East Germany, Hungary, or other places where they'll get better pay, access to Western goods. So those cadets were different future for the local girls. Unfortunately for my friend Valera, as well for the many boys and girls of my generation, we just had a poor timing. So he went to the great college, but in the wrong time. So he became a cadet in the Soviet Union, but he graduated as an officer in independent Ukraine. And suddenly there were no more assignments to Eastern Germany or Hungary, so he ended up going and staying in some middle of nowhere forest of Western Ukraine. It's just really horrible location, and yeah, it was really bad. So instead of marrying a pretty city girl from Kiev and taking her to East Germany, he married a local village girl in the Western Ukraine and brought her back to Kiev. My other childhood friend Dima, our mothers came from the same village, so we spent every summer break there together playing. He tried to go to the medical institute. He didn't pass the entry test, ended up being drafted to the army. He served in Soviet army. He actually served in Moscow, and he was there because he was drafted in the fall of 1988. So he was in Moscow in 1990 during the August coup. Then only after he came back, he managed to get into the medical institute because now he was on that quota of former military. So it was easier for him to become a student of the medical institute. Okay, and before I jump to my own story, how I went through the entry exams, I need to mention one fact I discovered. In Ukraine, the only colleges that didn't have a Jewish quota, so they accepted as many Jews as wanted to get in, were so-called pedagogiczkie instytuty. So that's the colleges that were preparing teachers. And maybe that explains why so many of my teachers were Jewish. Probably close to 40 or 50% of all my teachers that I remember, they were of Jewish descent. And in the early 90s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, 90% of them packed their bags and left for Israel or United States. Also, there was another question about getting into Soviet college, how important it was to be a good young pioneer and good Komsomol member. And Komsomol is the young communist organization of Soviet Union. And I don't think that affected much, but I recall that I became a Komsomol member for the only reason is I was told that you need to be a Komsomol member to get into college. And this is the only reason why I decided to become a member of Komsomol. I really didn't want to, but like, okay, I need to go to college, so I guess I better become a member. And every college had a so-called приемная комиссия, so it's like acceptance commission. So they will process paperwork and they will make a decision who will be allowed to take entry tests. So they'll look at your grades, look at your personal qualities, and then they'll publish a list of people there in the schedule when your test will be. And that's the next step. You come back to college in a couple of days and there'll be, names and names and names, and you just find your name and it tells you when to show up for your first test. Usually we had 3 exams. So in my case it was math with geometry together, then physics, then Russian literature. Yeah, believe it or not, I was getting into college in the capital of Ukraine, but I had my exam in Russian literature. And here I need to mention so-called проходной балл. So this will be like your path through grade. So that's the average of your 3 exams. So you add those 3 numbers divided by 3, and depending how many people trying to get in, as higher this pass through grade проходной балл would be. Unfortunately, I don't recall what was the проходной балл back in 1988 at the Kiev Polytechnic Institute. I believe maybe it was like 4.1. So 4 is good, right? 5 is excellent. So I was counting on maybe getting 4 or 5 on math, 4 or 3 on physics, because I wasn't that good, not strong in physics, and then I knew I was gonna get 5 excellent grade for the Russian literature. And I was so confident in Russian literature because I knew that the 3rd topic, so they give you 3 topics to write about, you choose one of them. There'll be 2 different books that you can write about main characters or the main story, your review or opinion, and the 3rd topic was always so-called свободная тема, free topic. So you just write about whatever you want. And I knew I just gonna wing it there, and I knew that it's gonna be excellent. I was quite a confident nerd. But my test taking didn't go as I planned. I scored only 3, so C in math. It's what I remember. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's what happened, because I remember I was freaking out and I realized, oh my God, if I'll score again 3, which is C in physics, and even if I score 5 in Russian literature, my average will be below 4 and I won't get into college. So I got my butt in gear and I studied a lot for my physics test. I tried to memorize all the formula I could, and the test was extremely tough, but I pulled the excellent grade. I got 5, which means A. Surprisingly, I still remember one of the problems I had to solve for my physics test. So that's the weight, like 10 kilograms, hanging on the rope over the pulley system and the specific height, and you let the rope go, and you need to calculate the speed at which weight will hit the ground. And here, pulley radius in play, weight, and all the other stuff. So there's a pretty complicated formula you need to calculate, but I managed to solve it. And as I planned and predicted, my Russian literature test went perfectly. I scored 5. So now my total was 3 for math, 5 for physics, and 5 for Russian literature. So the total amount was 13 points divided by 3 tests. So I came up with the average 4.33. And it was high enough to become a student of Kiev Polytechnical Institute. And as a cherry on the top, because I scored pretty high, I also qualified for so-called повышенная стипендия. So it's like a bonus stipend. Normally, students received monthly stipend of 40 rubles per month, but because I scored so high, I qualified for 50 rubles per month, which was good money back in 1988. My mother was making 130 rubles per month salary, and my stipend was 50 rubles per month. And if you follow my channel, you might remember that because of my stipend, I was able to afford my Kiev 19 film camera, which I purchased later, about May of 1989. And while we're on the topics of entry tests, I need to also talk about so-called шпаргалка. Шпаргалка, or some students called it шпора. So those were small tiny pieces of paper, cheat lists that you fill with formulas or other important information that you may be able to use while doing a test. Using шпаргалка during the test taking, of course, was not allowed, but people did it all the time, and there was many ways you could hide your шпаргалка, your formulas, you can write on your nail, you can hide in your bra. Some ladies would write the formulas on their legs, bare legs, and they're covered with the skirts. So there were many ways people were snacking in шпаргалки to help them to pass the test. And if you ask Comrade Sergey if he used шпаргалка during his test taking back in 1988, I neither can confirm nor deny your allegations. Or like some people reply here in America, I do not recall. Okay, I believe it's a good spot to stop right here, and in my next video I will tell you about my experience going to Soviet college, attending classes, and doing other interesting activities that Soviet students had to do. So please continue to submit your questions if you're interested in anything specific about being a Soviet student. I'm making a list of your questions and I will answer them along with my story. Once again, thanks again for watching Ushanka Show. I appreciate your support, appreciate your likes and comments, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.